My name is Caroline. I'm 36 years old, currently living in Seattle, and I'm the founder of an education foundation for abandoned children. But at my half-brother's wedding, I was introduced to the guests as the nanny. No one corrected it. No one protested. My stepmother just smiled and said, "She's always liked being behind the scenes." I was seated next to the restroom, while distant relatives I barely knew were placed near the bride and groom's table. Here's my question for you. Have you ever felt like your family was trying to hide you, as if your very existence embarrassed them? If you've ever felt like an outsider in your own home, share your story in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because right after this, you'll see exactly how they reacted when my truth came out in the middle of the wedding. I'm the result of a marriage my father always wanted to forget. When I was 3, he left my mother to marry Janice, the woman the whole town called the perfect wife. Me. I became something to cover up. A wrinkle in the family photo he was building from scratch. I still remember that afternoon, my mom sitting by the window, eyes red but no tears. I was too young to understand it all. All I knew was that the man who once called me his little princess no longer came home for dinner. After he moved out, our visits became rare. Just a few times a year, usually when no one else in the new family wanted to tag along. He'd take me out for ice cream, maybe the park, then drop me off again like a borrowed item. My name never appeared on their Christmas cards. Every year they sent photos taken by the pine trees. Everyone in matching red sweaters, hand in hand, all smiles. I wasn't in a single one. Janice never openly hated me. She just looked at me like I didn't belong. Whenever I called him Dad, she'd gently correct me, "You mean stepfather, right?" Even though I was his biological child, I was always referred to as his other daughter, Caroline from outside, Clara's girl. I learned to be quiet. Not to ask. Not to stand out. My mom used to say, "The more gentle you are, the less likely they'll hurt you." But then when I was 14, my mother died in a car accident on her way to a night shift. I remember the knock on the door, the police officer's face. My grandparents took me in, and from that moment on, I officially vanished from my father's family map. Not a single person from his side came to my mother's funeral. No condolences. No phone calls. Not even a bouquet for the altar. After that, I stopped being the kid who wished to be in a family photo. I buried myself in school as if every award could fill the void. I worked in the school library, washed dishes at a diner down the street, and saved every penny for advanced classes. At 17, I earned a full scholarship to a prestigious university on the East Coast. I remember holding the acceptance letter. My grandfather cried. My father? Not a text. Not a word. Even though I emailed him simply saying, "I got in, Dad." There was no reply. After graduation, I moved to Europe and worked for a nonprofit supporting abandoned children. I traveled from rural Romania to the slums of Kenya. The kids I helped had stories like mine, left out of their own family's narratives. For 12 years, no one from home reached out. No birthday messages. No check-ins. Sometimes I wondered if they even remembered I existed. Only once did Nathan, my half-brother, message me during his senior year of high school. Just one sentence. "Are you really my sister?" I replied, "Yes, I am. Even if you didn't choose it, I've always seen you as my brother." He never answered, but years later, when his daughter Ellie was born, I received a handwritten letter from someone named Emily, Ellie's mother. "Hi Caroline. Ellie talks about you like you're a superhero. She said you gave her her first storybook. I don't know what happened between you and the family, but I just wanted to say thank you. You did something that made my daughter feel loved." I still keep that letter tucked between photos of the literacy workshops I ran for migrant children. I never thought I'd come back. But Ellie needed me. And I didn't want to be silent anymore. My father once said, "Family is where no one gets left behind." It's a beautiful idea. But he never lived by it. I won't leave a child the way he left me. For Ellie, I came back. Not to reclaim a seat in a family photo I'd been erased from, but to show a little girl that someone would stand up for her, even if the whole room turned its back. I didn't come back for them. Not for the family photos that never had me. Not for a seat at a table I'd always been placed near the kitchen. Came back for Ellie. Ellie is Nathan's daughter, my 7-year-old niece with soft curls and bright eyes. The way she hugs me every time we meet, it's like she's afraid the world will fall apart if she lets go. She calls me Auntie C, A name only we use. I never told her to call me that. One day she looked up and asked, "Is C short for Caroline?" Then giggled and the name stuck. I've only seen Ellie a few times in recent years. Brief, quiet visits, usually when I happen to be in the States for work. Once, I sent her a children's book about a little bird learning to fly through stormy skies. Inside, I wrote in green ink, "To Ellie, the little bird with the biggest wings. Love, Auntie C." Weeks later, I got a handwritten letter from an unknown address, written in shaky childlike script. "Auntie C, I still keep the book under my pillow. Dad says not to talk about you, but I miss you. I keep that letter in my desk drawer, next to million-dollar contracts and documents people think are important. But I swear no paper has ever made my chest ache like that one. Emily doesn't like me. Maybe because I speak up, unlike everyone else in that family. I once called her out when she yelled at Ellie for spilling milk. I looked her in the eye and asked, "Have you ever asked how Ellie feels?" After that, I wasn't welcome at the house. But Ellie found ways to reach out. One time she sent me a handmade postcard with a purple heart and the tiny words, "I miss you." I didn't reply. I didn't want to make things harder for her. But I started watching from afar, checking in with a school contact I trusted, tracking her progress, her moods. I knew, even in a beautiful house, Ellie didn't feel safe. Last month, I got the wedding invitation for Nathan and Emily. I was ready to decline. I had even drafted an email that said something like, "I'm sorry, I'll be in Europe at that time." But then I received a text from an unknown number. "Auntie, I heard Mommy say there will be lots of people at the wedding. I'm scared. Will you come?" It came at 9 p.m. I didn't answer right away, but my heart clenched. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the time Ellie hid in the closet because she didn't want to wear the dress her stepmother picked. I found her curled up, holding her stuffed bunny, whispering, "I don't want to get it wrong, but Mommy keeps getting mad." She was 7. She didn't understand the world, but she knew exactly what it felt like not to be heard. I changed my flight. I decided I would be there. Not for Emily. Not for Nathan. Not to be glanced over like a misplaced housekeeper. I came so Ellie wouldn't have to be the lonely kid in the room. On the morning of the rehearsal, I arrived 15 minutes early. The garden was decorated with white candles and lavender. Ellie was standing near the sample cake, tiptoeing to peek at it, eyes wide. She turned, and when she saw me, her smile broke open like sunlight through heavy clouds. "Auntie C." She ran to me and threw her arms around my waist. I knelt down to hug her, and for a moment, it felt like every scar from the past decade softened in her little embrace. I heard Emily calling sharply from a distance, her voice like a needle. "Ellie, don't run around. You're ruining your dress." Ellie froze. I kept my arms around her and whispered, "I'm here now. It's okay." She nodded, then whispered back in my ear, "If you're here, I'm not scared anymore." A 7-year-old child shouldn't have to say that. But Ellie did. And that very sentence made me realize this return wasn't a choice. It was necessary. I stood up, took Ellie's hand, and looked toward the half-assembled stage in the middle of the garden. From a distance, I saw Janice talking with a group of people. She glanced at me over someone's shoulder with the same look she'd given me over a decade ago, cold, cautious, and full of contempt. I didn't look away. I looked straight into her eyes for the first time in many years. I was no longer the little girl who stayed quiet out of fear of upsetting others. I was no longer the child hidden behind curtains in every family photo. I was Caroline, the one Ellie trusted. The one who, today, would do everything in her power to make sure that little girl didn't feel afraid walking through a crowd pretending to love her. I arrived at the wedding on time, actually 15 minutes early, a habit I picked up from years of coordinating international conferences where every second carried weight. I wore a simple navy blue dress, my hair tied back neatly, and low heels so I could move quickly if Ellie needed me. The parking lot was packed, the white wedding car parked dead center like the final touch in a picture too perfect to be honest. Guests were beginning to arrive, chatting cheerfully, holding gift boxes wrapped in metallic paper and carefully tied ribbons. I climbed the steps to the main hall, slowly but steadily. "Excuse me, do you have an invitation?" A man in a black suit stopped me at the entrance. A small badge on his chest read "Reception Staff." I was a little surprised but responded calmly, "I'm the groom's sister. My name should be on the list." He looked me up and down, then glanced at the paper in his hand. I don't see Caroline listed here, ma'am. Are you sure you were invited? That question hit like a slap. I kept my composure. I'm Caroline Miller. I received the invitation. If you have questions about who sent it, you might want to ask Nathan. Before the man could respond, a woman's voice echoed from down the hall. A voice I knew by heart no matter how long I'd tried to forget it. What's going on here? Janice walked over, her steps light as if gravity didn't apply to her. Her hair was perfectly styled and pinned with a pearl clip. Her ivory dress reflected the quiet confidence of a woman used to controlling every space she entered. Oh, Caroline. She gave a slight nod, then turned to the staff member. It's fine. I'll handle this. Before I could say a word, she continued, her tone soft, like she was simply narrating a fact of life. We decided to keep the ceremony intimate. Just close family. I hope you understand. I stood frozen. I'm the groom's biological sister. Janice smiled, but her eyes turned the air between us to ice. You're his half-sister. This family didn't want confusion on such an important day. Before I could respond, a voice behind me rang out, firm, clear, and laced with disbelief. Wait, she's the global TED speaker from last year. Why is she being stopped out here? I turned around. It was Grant. Grant Harrison, the CEO of the largest edtech firm on the West Coast. We had met at a humanitarian investment summit in Chicago. I'd given a talk on using language education tech to help immigrant children adapt. Afterward, he invited me to collaborate on a digital library project for underserved schools. Janice looked uneasy. I'm sorry, and you are? Grant Harrison. And I think there's been a major mistake. He stepped forward, pulling out his phone. If you'll allow me, I think there's something every guest here should see. No one stopped him. The entire hallway froze. Grant played a video on his phone and held it up so the reception area could see the screen. My voice echoed from the speakers. Building empathy in a divided world doesn't begin with changing laws. It begins with listening to a child when they say, I'm scared. It was the opening line from my TED Talk last October, delivered to nearly 1,000 people in person and millions more online. My image on screen, hair pulled back, voice steady and sharp, cut through the wedding's carefully curated elegance like a quiet but undeniable blade. Grant didn't say another word. He looked from Janice to the staffer. This is Caroline Miller. She's funded over $1 million in education projects across 3 states. She was just named to the 30 under 40 Shaping America's Future list. If you say she isn't family, then maybe you need to revisit your definition of family. I didn't lift my head. I didn't need to. The silence from the crowd was the loudest sound in the room. I heard the whispers. That's her. The scholarship fund donor? I just read about her last week. Janice took a step back. She tried to keep smiling, but her jaw was beginning to tighten. She glanced around, then cleared her throat. There was clearly a small oversight. Please come in. I walked past the entrance. No thanks. No turning back. Each step peeled away another layer of silence they'd wrapped around me for years. Ahead was a garden bathed in golden light and white flowers. Guests were settling into their seats. From across the yard, Ellie saw me. She jumped up, ran straight toward me, and gripped my hand tightly. I told you, she whispered, eyes wide with emotion. You came. I gently squeezed her hand. For the first time that day, I smiled. Not because I was let in, but because I knew no one could erase me from my own story. My footsteps echoed softly on the stone path as Ellie and I entered the wedding area. Late afternoon sunlight filtered through white ribbons hanging high above the seating rows. The scent of lavender drifted in the air, but there was nothing sweet about it anymore. The thick silence spread slowly, like everyone was holding their breath to confirm whether what they had just witnessed was real. I felt their stares. Some turned away. Some glanced sideways. Some didn't even try to hide their shock. A woman in a sea blue dress subtly tilted her phone toward her husband and whispered, "That's her. She was in Forbes this March." I didn't need to look back to hear them. My name was already spreading across the garden like a breeze brushing delicate petals, gentle but unmistakable. Caroline Miller, a man whispered behind me. Founder of Haven Fund, $80 million, right? A woman at the champagne table pulled out her phone, tapped a few times, then looked up with wide eyes. She's the one who ran that refugee education program in our state. Remember. I kept my eyes on the altar. No nods. No denial. What they had just uncovered was true. But it was also the life I had lived in silence for years. I sensed someone approaching from the left. Quietly. But the presence was familiar. Caroline. I turned around. My father stood there. His hair was grayer than I remembered, his eyes squinting slightly in the sunlight, but still the same eyes that once knelt to hug me in the kitchen when I was little, before he disappeared into another life. Is it really you? His voice wasn't loud, but just enough for those nearby to hear. No one said a word. Even the background music abruptly stopped, like a stage waiting for its next line. I took a breath, steadying my voice. I've always been me, Dad. You just never wanted to look. He froze. My response wasn't bitter. But it wasn't gentle either. It was the truth. His gaze swept the crowd as if searching for some explanation. But all he received were awkward glances or averted eyes. No one spoke up. No one chuckled. The whispers only made things clearer. She's Nathan's half-sister? How come we've never heard of her? There must be a reason. I turned my head and spotted Emily standing not far away, clutching her wine glass so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Her face had drained of color, her eyes fixed on me like she was trying to confirm if I was really the same person from that TED Talk video. Nathan stood next to her, staring at me wide-eyed in disbelief. He took a hesitant step toward me, shoulders slightly hunched. You're Caroline? The founder of the Haven Foundation. I nodded. Yes. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. I looked straight into my brother's eyes. Did you ever ask? The question landed like a small stone on still water. No big splash, but ripples spreading in all directions. Nathan said nothing. Emily opened her mouth to speak, but Janice stepped in, positioning herself between us. This isn't the time to air personal matters. I held my silence for a moment, then replied slowly and clearly, people want the truth, until it makes them uncomfortable. But sometimes, what's been hidden the longest is exactly what needs to be heard. Janice let out a soft laugh, but her lips twitched. You should know how to protect the family's image on a joyful day like this. What family? I asked calmly. The one that never included me in Christmas photos? The one that's never sent me a birthday card? Or the one that just told me I wasn't on the guest list? An older woman nearby, I assumed a friend of my stepmother, muttered under her breath, "This is quite awkward." My father was still there, his eyes following every word I said, like facing a past he'd hidden too long. I met his gaze. You chose to rebuild a new family. I understand that. But my existence isn't something to be ashamed of. If you're not ready to acknowledge that in front of others, then I'll do it myself. Grant stepped closer, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. You don't have to prove anything, Caroline. Everything you've done, that's your answer. I didn't respond. But I looked around the crowd, watching people lower their eyes. Some red-faced, others pretending to be busy with their phones. Then I saw Ellie sitting a few rows from the altar, holding her gray stuffed bunny tightly. When our eyes met, she gave me a tiny nod. Like she understood, today wasn't just about a wedding. It was the first day I walked into that old house and was no longer invisible. And all of them, whether they liked it or not, had begun to see me. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to break a glass or start a fight. I didn't have to scream that I belonged to this family. I only had to do one simple, precise thing at exactly the right moment. I walked to the main table in the center of the garden. Fine porcelain plates lined up perfectly, crystal glasses shimmering under the string lights, ivory linens ironed flat with not a wrinkle in sight. A name card labeled Bride and Groom's Family sat at the two most prominent seats. I glanced around at the silent faces. My father, Janice, Nathan, Emily, and relatives still stunned by the earlier TED Talk video. I opened my clutch and pulled out a cream envelope, sealed with a red wax stamp shaped like a sunflower. With calm and clarity, I placed the envelope in the center of the table, among silver forks and blooming white roses. I didn't look at anyone directly. I simply said, "This is the contract covering 70% of today's wedding expenses. It's signed by me, under the company I founded. None of you knew because I didn't need you to." A gasp broke the silence. Someone nudged the person beside them, eyes wide in disbelief. Janice stood from her chair, about to speak, But I raised my hand slightly, not harshly, just firmly enough to stop her. I didn't bring this contract to show off, I said. I brought it because at this event you're all calling a family celebration, I wasn't listed as a guest. But my name was on the invoice. Emily swallowed hard. Nathan looked down, lips pressed tightly. My father no longer held his stern expression. He braced himself on the table, staring at the envelope like it held a truth he had never prepared to face. I didn't lower my voice or raise it. I simply spoke clearly, each word like reading a statement someone tried to erase from the record. I didn't come here to steal the spotlight. I came because a 7-year-old girl deserves to have a beautiful memory. I paid for this event because of Ellie. Not for the bride, not for the groom, and certainly not for the family that's always treated me like an outsider. I just didn't want Ellie to grow up feeling forgotten, the way I once did. Silence. Not a sound among the candles and blossoms. Only the breeze rustling through lavender and Janice's uneven breathing as she fought to maintain composure. Grant stepped up behind me, his hand resting on the back of the chair I stood before. He said nothing, but his presence alone was a quiet show of support. I used to think staying on the sidelines was enough, I continued, eyes still on the envelope. That doing good, helping others, and living quietly would speak for itself. But silence gets mistaken for absence. They erased me from the photos, from the stories, from the introductions. And now they've erased me from the very celebration I helped make possible. Emily stood up, her voice trembling. You should have told us from the start. I had no idea. I looked at her. You didn't need to. I didn't do this for gratitude. But don't act surprised when the curtain gets pulled back, and the person behind it isn't who you expected. Nathan stood beside her, his voice low. Why through an anonymous company? Because if you knew, you would never have accepted it. And Ellie would never have had today, I said without hesitation. Janice clenched her fists. You're trying to turn Nathan's special day into your own stage. I turned to her. Calmly, not confrontational. I didn't turn it into anything. I simply pulled back the curtain you put up. Someone cleared their throat. An older man from the bride's side spoke up, his voice steady and respectful. So, she's the one behind all of this? Grant responded. She's the director of an education foundation active in 11 states. She's changed thousands of children's lives. And today she only wants one thing, to be acknowledged for being here at the very wedding she helped make possible. A woman near the champagne table whispered, never seen a gathering where the one shut out is the one who laid the foundation. I didn't say another word. I simply opened the envelope, laid the contract pages out across the table, turned toward the crowd. My name, the signing date, the contract's full value, the company's seal, it was all there. Clear. Undeniable. I lifted my head and slowly scanned the crowd. My eyes met Ellie's and I saw her give a small nod, like a thank you without words. For me that was enough. But for them, the ones who had erased me from every family photo, what just happened was more than enough to pull the curtain down. And I wouldn't walk away like a shadow. I was still standing by the main table when my father approached. His eyes had softened as if for a fleeting moment he was no longer the man who had turned away coldly, but a father looking at the daughter he left behind long ago. Caroline, he said, his voice hoarse, I didn't know it would come to this. I turned to him. You didn't know, or you didn't want to know? He blinked and exhaled as though the weight on his chest had kept him silent for years. I thought if everything stayed quiet, everyone would be happier. Janice cares so much about appearances. Family, tradition, unity, everything had to fit a certain mold. And you were always outside that frame. I listened to him, each word like he was trying to rearrange shattered pieces to justify something. But none of them were whole enough to make the truth fit. I'm your daughter, I said slowly. Even if I don't share Janice's last name. Even if I've never been in a Christmas photo. I'm your blood. That shouldn't need to be acknowledged or hidden. It's just a fact. Janice stepped up then. Her eyes sharp like blades. She stood beside my father and gently adjusted the collar of his shirt, as if that motion could restore control over a crumbling scene. That's enough, Caroline, she said, her voice low. She never fit into my family. She carries memories I didn't choose. And I shouldn't have to pretend to accept what makes Thanksgiving awkward. I wasn't angry. I wasn't surprised. Her words were what I had always known lived inside her, but now they were said aloud in broad daylight, in front of 100 witnesses. I do fit. The voice came quiet but firm, silencing all whispers. I turned. Ellie. She stood alone on the lawn, clutching her stuffed gray bunny, her round eyes wide. Her small body trembled from fear, but she stood tall, braver than most of the adults in that garden. Aunt Caroline is the only one who loves me without needing pictures or spotlights. Every gaze turned to the little girl. Some guests placed hands over their hearts as if to steady their pulse. Emily, Ellie's mother, started to step forward but stopped when she saw me looking directly at her daughter. Ellie hesitated, then took another step forward, her voice steady despite her trembling lips. She doesn't care if I wear the right dress. She doesn't make me sit still just to look nice. She asks me what I want, and she listens even when no one else does. A woman in the crowd whispered, "By God, she's telling the truth." I knelt down, arms open, and Ellie ran into them instinctively. I held her tightly, feeling her shallow breaths slowly calm as my arms wrapped around her. My father stepped back. His eyes were red, but he said nothing. Janice stood frozen, her face pale. She turned away, but no one looked to her for leadership anymore. Nathan was speechless. He watched his own daughter do what he hadn't dared, speak up for the truth. I whispered to Ellie, "I'm here. Thank you for saying what so many adults are too afraid to say." She nodded, then raised her voice one last time, clear and certain, like it would be carved into every heart there. "I don't need more family photos. I just need someone who really loves me." A long silence followed. Not awkward anymore, but the kind of stillness that only happens when a child has spoken all the truth grown-ups have buried. And from that very heart, Ellie had become a voice no one could ignore. I stood holding her in my arms. She rested her head on my shoulder, as if she'd finally found the safest place amid a party that seemed designed to exclude us both. There was no need for more justifications. The story had spoken for itself, through the smallest, bravest voice in that garden. I was still holding Ellie when Grant stepped onto the temporary stage at the head of the garden. He adjusted the microphone with a calm motion, then faced the silent crowd. "Apologies for the interruption," he began, his voice low and clear, "but I believe a truth needs to be spoken now." Every eye turned to him. Grant didn't focus on any one person, but each word felt aimed straight at the minds of those who had looked away for too long. About 2 years ago, we received an anonymous donation for the Recovery Fund in Louisiana, right after the worst storm in a decade. The donor didn't want to be named, but I was allowed to know. And that donor was Caroline Miller. The air felt frozen. I still stood there, silent. Grant's gaze now turned to Emily. "Your family was among the priority recipients," he continued. "Your home was rebuilt using that fund. Your daughter received a bridge scholarship from that same source. And Caroline was the one who personally approved the first application." Emily looked like the color had drained from her face. Her champagne glass tilted, drops spilling over. She turned to me, voice barely more than a breath. You saved my family?" I looked at her. My smile wasn't big, wasn't smug. Just enough. "Not so anyone would owe me," I said softly. "I just never expected the ones who disowned me to be living off what I gave." A ripple spread through the crowd. "Oh my God, it's true? She helped them and still got left out of the wedding? Unbelievable." Emily gripped the chair arm beside her, her face pale. "Why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you let us know?" I shook my head. Because at that moment what mattered was that someone got the help they needed. Who got the credit didn't matter to me anymore. My father turned to look at Emily, then back at me, his eyes caught between 2 generations of the same mistake. He seemed about to speak, but I stepped forward, set Ellie down gently, then turned to face them all. "You may never call me family," I said calmly, "but none of you can deny that I was here. Not just today, but in all those quiet moments when I chose to stand in the background, not because I lacked power but because I didn't want anyone to feel indebted." Grant gave a slight nod. "And that same woman, Caroline, is now leading a new initiative, a network of free counseling centers for abandoned children. Not for fame, not for recognition, but because she knows what it's like to grow up in silence." A round of applause rose from the back. It wasn't loud, but it was genuine. A middle-aged woman in a purple lace dress, possibly one of Emily's aunts, dabbed at her eyes and said, "She's done what no one in this family ever dared to." Janice stood frozen like a porcelain statue with a cracked base. Nathan sat down, head bowed. Emily stared at me, dazed, as if seeing someone entirely unfamiliar, someone she'd misjudged all along. I didn't need applause. I didn't need a pat on the back. I had laid the truth squarely on their table, not to lecture them but to place it in the light, where they could no longer ignore it. I bent down, took Ellie's hand and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. Family isn't about picture-perfect smiles, flowery words, or expensive dresses. Family is where no one has to hide who they are just to be accepted. A light breeze passed through the white ribbon decorations, lifting a few paper petals from the canopy above. No one said anything more, because everything that needed to be said was already there. I didn't stay for the cake cutting. I didn't linger for the photo sessions, or stand among the crowd watching the bride and groom raise their glasses under the floral arch. As everyone's eyes still circled around the contracts and the truth now laid bare, I quietly turned away. I didn't need further validation. I had said what needed to be said. The truth was on the table, under the afternoon sun and in front of far too many witnesses to ever be denied again. I led Ellie back to her seat, gently stroked her hair, then leaned down and whispered, "I need to step away for a bit, but I'm leaving you something." From my handbag I pulled out a file wrapped carefully in dark green silk ribbon. On the front cover I had handwritten in neat cursive, "For Ellie. No intermediaries. No conditions." She looked up at me, her clear eyes not needing to ask anything. He understood. Somehow, even at her young age, Ellie had already learned to feel what no one had ever taught her. I placed the folder on the main banquet table, among the gold-stitched menus and white orchids. No explanations. No glances back. I walked toward the gate where the usher had once blocked my way. This time he bowed his head slightly as I passed, a silent gesture that spoke more than an apology. I didn't stop. I didn't need apologies from someone simply following a list. I just wanted them to remember that my presence didn't need a nameplate. That night I returned to my hotel, slipped off the heels that had bruised my feet all afternoon, and sat quietly at the window on the 12th floor watching the city below. I didn't check my phone. Didn't go online. I simply let myself breathe and exhaled without feeling pressure in my chest. The next morning I woke later than usual. Sunlight slipped gently through the curtain, soft and patient. I poured myself a cup of tea and just as I set it down my phone began to buzz. The first message was from Julia, my event coordinator in New York. "You need to check Twitter. You're trending." I unlocked my phone. It wasn't just trending. It was blowing up. A 3-minute clip, capturing the moment Grant revealed I was the anonymous donor behind the Hurricane Recovery Fund, had gone viral, filmed by a guest. It included Emily's stunned expression when I said, "I never expected the people who erased me to live off my money." The hashtag Caroline Miller was everywhere. One account reposted my TED Talk with the headline, "The woman erased from her family, who still paid for their wedding." By noon, the local newspaper ran the headline, "The woman behind the $1 million wedding, rejected, erased, but still behind it all." The comments section overflowed. People shared stories of being ignored by their families, of helping others without acknowledgement. Even men in their 60s wrote things like, "I thought I lived by logic until my wife burst into tears watching this clip." I scrolled through each post but my chest didn't tighten like it used to. What I felt was still, like a lake after a storm. Not gloating. Not revenge. Just clarity. I didn't reply. Didn't message back the press. I didn't say anything at all. This time the truth spoke on its own. That evening Julia called back, half laughing, half exasperated. "Do you know the sponsor of our program just asked if you'd keynote at the Leadership Beyond Titles Summit? All because of a random wedding video." I smiled but not broadly. I simply said, "This time if they invite me, they'll have to put my actual name on the card." Punishment isn't always rage. It's not forcing someone to their knees. Sometimes punishment is stillness. It's letting people see that you don't need to raise your voice to make them reflect on who they've become. It's placing the truth on the table and walking away. Leaving them there, seated among everything they pretended not to see. 1 week after the wedding I returned to Seattle. Life seemed to pick up its usual rhythm. strategy meetings, approvals to sign Phase 3 expansion plans for the New Mexico project. But beneath all that familiarity, I felt something shifting, quiet and deeper than any agenda could reach. On Friday morning, just as I was brewing tea, the doorbell rang. A cardboard box sat neatly on my porch. No return name, only firm uppercase letters on the top. Caroline, private. I brought it into the kitchen, cut the tape with the letter opener I kept near the tea drawer. Inside was an old leather-bound journal, its corners worn. A folded handkerchief. And a neatly folded page, inked in precise handwriting. I read this journal twice. First to see what you wrote. Second to hear what you were saying. I turned away out of fear, not hate. But now I will be silent. And listen if you still want to speak. I picked up the journal. Light in weight but heavy in meaning. The leather was that rough kind I used to love as a child. The kind my mother said looked like it belonged to someone with something big to say. I opened the first page. The handwriting of an 11-year-old girl appeared in purple ink, slanted and smudged in places. Today I got a 9.5 on my writing assignment. I wanted to tell Dad, but he didn't come. The next page. Mom said maybe he was busy. But I think he just didn't want to come. I practiced my handwriting all week to copy the poem for him. I flipped through each page, every old emotion rising again like they had never left. Small, unnoticed sadnesses. Flickering hopes snuffed out in silence. Every page was proof I had been there. Had grown. Had felt. My father had kept this journal all those years. Maybe he'd found it in Mom's old apartment after she passed. Maybe he meant to return it but never found the courage. I don't know. But now he had sent it. And with it, something unspoken. One final moment where he did not deny what once existed. I didn't write back. No text. No call. I didn't need to. Because his acknowledgement of my existence was no longer something I lived my life waiting for. I simply sat down, opened my laptop, and created a new document. The title I typed first, Invisible Ink, What They Didn't See. The keys clicked in a rhythm I knew by heart as I began to write the first lines. Not accusations, not a bitter memoir. Just the truth. A truth once written in invisible ink. On the dinner table, on the invitations, on the faces of those who once called me a stranger. Now those words would appear clear and visible. No longer hidden in private folders. No longer erased from family photos. No longer replaced by silence. I thought back to that moment at the wedding, standing in the light, surrounded by people who once believed I would always stay in the shadows. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to demand attention. I just needed to stand there. And for the first time I saw myself more clearly than ever before. I used to believe that staying silent was the only way to keep the peace. I had learned how to lower my head, step back, avoid making others uncomfortable. I accepted being left out so the rest could stay comfortable in their picture. But then I realized, peace doesn't come from being hidden. Peace comes when you choose to be present without asking for permission. When you walk into the room without waiting to be invited. When you raise your head under the very gazes that once made you feel small. When you decide to hold on to who you are instead of holding on to the role others gave you. Peace comes in the quiet moment when you sit alone and write the story that no longer belongs to anyone but yourself. And in that moment I understood, silence isn't the end. It's the beginning of a voice no one can silence anymore. I don't know if my story reminded you of someone in your own family. Someone who was left out of the frame, called by a name that never fit, who stayed quiet so others could breathe easier. But if you've ever felt pushed aside, rejected in the one place that was supposed to be home, then maybe you understand that silence isn't always peace. Sometimes it's just a thin blanket covering a wound no one ever dared to touch. So I want to ask you, have you ever gone through that? Have you ever kept quiet just to avoid breaking something? And how long will it be before you finally choose to speak up for yourself? Tell me if you'd like. I'll read it. I'll listen. And if you'd like to join me for more stories about family, about the things we never say out loud, about the quiet lives that carry so much strength, subscribe to the channel. Because here every story matters. Even the ones that were once written in invisible ink.